The idea of moral relativism is if you speak to a person on a campus or an intellectual and you say to them, what about beheadings? They will say, well, look, who are we to tell another culture that they shouldn't cut off heads? This is the stupidity.
But God help the Jews if they defend themselves.
You can have 22 failed Arab Muslim societies, utter failures. But you know what? We need a 23rd one. You need another failure of a genocidal state like Palestine. But Israel, oh no, Jews have no right to self-determination. We don't call a barbarian a barbarian. That would be a horrible thing to do.
And we don't call a Hamas a terrorist.
No, but we do call Israelis Nazis, and we want to call the defense of Israel a Holocaust.
What is the best current accepted definition of anti-Semitism?
I refer to the IRA definition. I think it is the best one. The hatred of Jews, a pathological hatred that extends to wishing them to be all eliminated, to be killed. What we do get instead is this, no, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Zionism, when in fact most Jews are Zionists. Oh, no, I have nothing against Israel Jews. I just think Israel should not exist.
I think the other side of moral relativism would be moral equivalence, the quiet anti-Semitism, the subtle anti-Semitism that we have to watch. And on a news media release, when I hear the words that really come down to moral equivalence, it disturbs me greatly. Because there are no two sides in a conflict when these terrorists, who are genocidal, murderous maniacs, use rape as a tool to achieve military objectives. Beheadings, mutilations of bodies, the most horrific things that took place on October 7th. And not only that, but they were proud of. They put it on their headcount and they broadcasted it to the world. And the media having the audacity to stand up and to talk in terms of moral equivalence, comparing one side to the other. There is no sides when you commit acts like that. There is no opportunity for a negotiation where you're dealing with the death cult and the lovers of death. And it's incredible dissonance that the world just doesn't see it.
Globalize the Intifada is not protected speech. If you're engaged in speech that represents a true threat, you receive no First Amendment protection. The words are merely there to get the other person to punch you back. There's no free speech protection for that.
Incitement.
Incitement of imminent lawlessness. Globalize the Intifada. These words are very clear, and they are being acted upon as demonstration that these words are not merely slogans supporting Palestinians. They are marching orders to kill Jews.
Today we are joined by someone whose voice bridges the worlds of law, literature, and Jewish moral clarity. He has spent a lifetime wrestling with the moral architecture of civilization, what justice means, why revenge matters, and what role Jews must play in confronting evil. Thane Rosenbaum, and I think I've got that right, is an author, legal scholar, and public intellectual whose works dissect justice, revenge, and the Jewish condition in a morally confused world. He is the child of Holocaust survivors. His life's work through novels, and we will introduce his 10th one today, essays, and media has explored the legacy of trauma, the necessity of moral outrage, and the role of Jewish identity in the fight for justice. In a time when the truth is manipulated and moral relativism often clouds right and wrong, his voice offers unapologetic clarity and sharp cultural insight. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. Please don't be shy. Share this episode. Follow me on IsraelEllis.com and on Substack. Thane Rosenbaum, welcome to The Unfiltered View, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Israel. You have an important voice, and I'm happy to be here on your stage.
You know, when you talk about voices, this isn't something that I was trained to do. It's not something I ever saw myself as doing. But I think like everybody else, after October 7th, things changed for all of us. And I just could not keep silent. And so I put my voice out there because I believe that it's probably our greatest tool to fight the anti-Semitism and change the narrative, at least outside the echo chamber. We must have our voices heard to ensure that never again is not just mere words, but is actual action taken behind those words by our generation and future generations to come. Thank you so much Thank you so much for being on the show with me today. You are a very accomplished person. I've achieved nothing in comparison, and I'm honored. Really, I've looked into your bio, and by the way, has anyone told you you have a slight resemblance to Gene Wilder?
I have heard that for many, many years.
I just had to say it because
No, I knew where you were going before you said it.
Congratulations, your new book, Beyond Proportionality. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about who you are. We'll talk about what you think. We're going to ask some really great questions today. Maybe let's start off, Thane, with just talk about yourself, your brief bio, what you're about. What is the one thing that is your purpose in life?
To leave evidence. There's only really two good ways to do that. One is children, and another way is to leave evidence of something that you think is important, that should be known, and that can be repeated. And that is one advantage. Writers don't make much money, but if they're good at it, they actually can leave evidence of themselves through their writings and books, public appearances like here with you, Israel. Hopefully this will last forever. You will archive this, and this will be a time capsule. So I think I was a very frustrated Wall Street lawyer for many years, and I thought I had things to say. And in a world that I love what you said about, you use the phrase, very few people say the word moral relativism, but it is part of the difficulty that we've had in the Western world, is the issue of moral relativism. And I have been a law professor for many years and focused on human rights, but wondered why the human rights violations committed in Islamic societies is forbidden, why you cannot raise that. So I was one of the few law professors in the country that focused a lot on human rights conditions within Islamic societies, which of course made me a racist and an Islamophobe. You're simply not allowed to say any of those things. So I kept saying it. This was long before October 7th. You know, the idea of moral relativism is, and I know that your listeners are going to say, he can't be right, but it is. I'm absolutely right. If you speak to a person on a campus or an intellectual and you say to them, what about beheadings? They will say, well, look, who are we to tell another culture that they shouldn't cut off heads? Who are we? We like the New York Yankees. They like to cut off heads. Should we not watch the New York Yankees? This is the stupidity, this idea that all cultures stand in relation to each other. None is better. Remember, Barack Obama told the world there's no such thing as American exceptionalism. I remember thinking, what is more exceptional than America? Seriously, Greece, Iran, Iraq, you can't even stand up for your own country. You're so embarrassed about whatever it is you're embarrassed about.
It's a bizarre case of complete dissonance.
Yeah.
In otherwise smart people.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise smart people. You would expect more, that they'd say, beheadings? You're okay with that?
But God help the Jews if they defend themselves.
Yeah.
And then it's like all hell breaks loose. We can judge them. We can talk about them. You know, I think the other side of moral relativism, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be moral equivalence.
Yeah.
And it really bothers me. You know, words matter, and words matter even more so after October 7th, after October 8th, actually, in everything that's going on, because you have to look at the subtlety of anti-Semitism, not just about the overt actions. Everyone's focused on the protests, and they're focused on the actions that maybe the world finds outrageous in a moral way. But it's actually, I think, it is the quiet anti-Semitism, the subtle anti-Semitism that we have to watch. And on a news media release, when I hear the words that really come down to moral equivalence, it disturbs me greatly, because there are no two sides in a conflict when the other side, when a party, and we'll call them a party, when these terrorists who are genocidal, murderous maniacs use rape as a tool to achieve military objectives, beheadings, mutilations of bodies, the most horrific things that took place on October 7th. And not only that, but they were proud of it. They put it on their head caps and they broadcasted it to the world. And someone has the audacity to stand up, whether it be a leader or it be a broadcaster, and the media having the audacity to stand up and to talk in terms of moral equivalence, comparing one side to the other. There is no sides when you commit acts like that. There is no opportunity for a negotiation where you're dealing with the death cult and the lovers of death. And it's incredible dissonance that the world just doesn't see it.
Yeah, well, that's why the people who hate Israel don't like the IRA definition. It's also an issue of moral equivalence. You know, IRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition, redefining anti-Semitism. And this started in Europe, by the way. It started, I think, in Switzerland. It started in the European Union. And around 40 some odd countries now have a new definition of Israel, of anti-Semitism. And it was also approved by the State Department. Joe Biden shuffled his feet, hesitated. He was supposed to implement it throughout the federal system. But one of the things that it does is, if you're holding Israel to a different standard than any other country, you're an anti-Semite. If you don't think that Jews have a right to self-determination, you're an anti-Semite. If you call Israel Nazis, you're an anti-Semite. Now, this is very important because, you know, it used to be, well, anti-Semitism is when you say that Jews kill children, Christian children, and make matzah out of their blood. Yes, in the Middle Ages, that's what you said. But not today. Today, there's a new way of saying it. And so this drives the squad crazy in the United States university faculty, because they love to just say that Israel's the worst human rights violator in the history of the planet. They love to ignore human rights violations all over the world. And the moral equivalence argument is they love it to call Israel Nazis. They say Israel learned the lessons and now they commit the Holocaust against Palestinians. So this is why, and this goes directly to the point you're making about moral equivalence, because that's their biggest objection. This new IRA definition doesn't work for them because they really, really want to hold Israel to a higher standard. They want to call Israel Nazis. They want to call Israel's self-defense the Holocaust. They want to say that Jews are the only people on the planet that deserve no self-determination. You can have 22 failed Arab Muslim societies, failed under any criteria, democracy, human rights, look at any Arab Muslim country, utter failures. But you know what? We need a 23rd one. You need another one. You need another failure of a genocidal state like Palestine. But Israel, oh no, Jews have no right to self-determination. Clearly, that is anti-Semitism. And clearly, that's an example of moral relativism, to say we are simply saying this side we don't judge. We don't judge them because it would be racist. We don't call a barbarian a barbarian. That would be a horrible thing to do.
And we don't call a Hamas a terrorist.
No. But we do call Israelis Nazis, and we want to call the defense of Israel a Holocaust.
The former president of the CBC News, her name was Catherine Tate. I'm sure it still is, but she's no longer the president. That hasn't changed much at CBC, nor has it changed much in terms of other organizations like the BBC. It's pretty a travesty to talk about a travesty of justice, what they do with public funds to provide bias views. But there's actually official policy that journalists were not allowed to refer to Hamas as terrorists, rather militants. Yeah, they're militants. The words matter. And okay, so I just want to ask you, and just for clarity reasons and for everybody listening, what is the best current accepted definition of anti-Semitism?
Again, I refer to the IRA definition. I think it is the best one. Because again, it extends the basic understanding of hating Jews and looking for and wishing for their death. It's not, what we do get instead is this, no, I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm anti-Zionism, when in fact most Jews are Zionists and most Zionists are not there for religious reasons. That there is those things are identical, but everyone wants to make the distinction. Oh, no, I have nothing against Israel Jews. I just think Israel should not exist. What they're really saying in that instance is, I kind of like the way it was before there was in Israel. I kind of like the idea that Jews could be persecuted around the world. They can be expelled from their countries. They can be subject to pogroms and genocides, and they would have no options. I kind of like that one.
But are there actual words, Thane? Is there an actual definition that you could quote?
Well, I think it's clear that the most simplest one is the hatred of Jews. And again, that's not ideological from the left or the right. It's non-ideological. The hatred of the Jews and a pathological hatred that extends to wishing them to be all eliminated, to be killed. But I do think that that definition now needs to be expanded to say that you cannot hide behind anti-Zionism and you can't hide behind human rights in favor of Palestinians, because that's the other argument. Oh, no. I have nothing against Jews. I'm simply supporting Palestinians. And so therefore, whenever I see a Jew, wherever they are, whether they have ever been to Israel or not, whether I don't even ask them whether they have an opinion about a two-state solution, I simply say, are you Jewish? I can kill you. Are you Jewish? I can punch you in the face. And so again, I use this in my book, Beyond Proportionality. I use the analogy with the Uyghurs in China. There's 1 million ethnic minority people in China. There's only 1 million of them. Remember, there are billions of Chinese, but there's only 1 million Muslims in China. They're called the Uyghurs. And the Uyghurs have been subject to forced concentration camps, sterilization, abortion, and murder. Right? 1 million of them. All right? That's a giant number. Now, the world doesn't know about the Uyghurs. Nobody knows. They never heard of them. They haven't heard about the Tigrayans in Ethiopia either. 300,000 of them have been killed. The world doesn't care about people being killed unless Jews are killing them. So the Chinese people, and remember, the Uyghurs are Muslim. So you'd think you'd go, oh, you have to love the Muslims no matter where they are. They're such lovely people. Of course, you have to protect them, but not the Uyghurs. Not the Uyghurs. Could you imagine if people ran into a Chinese restaurant in Toronto or in Montreal or New York and started screaming in a Chinese restaurant about the Uyghurs and started screaming shame and genocide, killing babies and throwing paint at the walls of Chinese restaurants? Because that's what's happening in America. If you're Jewish, if you have a Jewish store, if you have a Jewish last name, you're fair game. A target is placed on you without anything. So if you're saying I'm only against Zionism, that's ridiculous. You have no idea whether Jews are Zionists or not. Most are, but you never asked them. You simply said, are you a Jew? And that's enough to have them killed.
There's this ignorance and there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the definition and legislation with regards to the criminality of using free speech, which is a conundrum, and we'll talk about it in a second because you talk about it about the limits of free speech, that there is a justification for limits on free speech, which I agree, but using the very civil liberties that were presented, that were created to protect free world, and using it against the free world by introducing lies and hatred into it. And I find it very frustrating, as well as many out there do, is that you might have these recognized and accepted definitions, but it doesn't translate down to the court system. And in Toronto, for example, in Toronto alone last year, and that's where I'm from Toronto, there were 450 hate crimes charges laid as a result of protests over anti-Semitic activities. 0 convictions. And the other day, when I was speaking at a Federation event, a gentleman came up to me, 25-year veteran of the police force, and he said to me, he says, and he had tears in his eyes. He said, you have no idea how frustrating it is that we are confronted daily without the agency or the ability to hold up the law and to protect the Jewish people. And he came out to my event where I talk about the wake-up call, I talk about my book, I talk about what's going on since October 7th, that he wants to express himself, and he wanted to express that support to me. And the fact is that there is a constituency of many public servants out there who are frustrated by the fact that they lack agency from leadership to be able to take what is not only a defined definition of anti-Semitism, but the decency of what we know is anti-Semitic. We know it's wrong. And yet our public agencies cannot protect us. And you talk about civil liberties, and you talk about that there are cases where maybe free speech should be curbed. Can you talk about that right now in terms of what's going on today, in terms of the overt and the subtle anti-Semitism that is happening since October 7th?
Well, I've been a longtime law professor for many decades, and so I find it shocking, appalling, that I seem to be the only law professor in the entire United States that thinks that globalize the intifada is not protected speech, right? Americans, not so with Canada. Canada is a little less permissive than the United States. We have very widespread free speech protections. But even we have very specific rules. For instance, true threats. If you're engaged in speech that represents a true threat, you receive no First Amendment protection. If you engage in speech that constitutes fighting words, likely that someone has no exposition of an idea at all, the words are merely there to get the other person to punch you back, there's no free speech protection for that.
Incitement.
Incitement of imminent lawlessness. Yeah, all of those things are carve-outs from First Amendment freedoms, and yet all of those things took place on campuses. And everyone instead used the word, well, everyone has a right to academic freedom. Everybody has a right to free speech. And I wrote extensively and spoke extensively. I said, no, you're not. None of those statements by any means necessary. Really? Globalize the intifada. These words are very clear, and they are being acted upon as demonstration that these words are not merely slogans supporting Palestinians. They are marching orders to kill Jews.
They're meant to incite hatred. They're meant to give a signal to sleeper cells, to people who are lying in wait, who have been radicalized, and they're just waiting to act. We call them lone wolf attacks. I don't believe that there is a lone wolf attack, because the lone wolf, when we talk something about a lone wolf attack, we're actually taking away responsibility of anything other than that person who carried forward with that lone wolf attack. But I think that we should be looking at the broad responsibility of the imams who preach, of the online rhetoric and the narrative that's happening, even at our public institutions, and at the way we describe things. There's a website in Canada called findidfsoldiers.net. It's about Canadian lone soldiers. Canadian lone soldiers. A lone soldier is someone who's gone off, who's a citizen of Canada or America or some other country and has joined the IDF. Their authors are extremely careful. They're aggregating public information, but I say it's a misuse of that public information, and that they are hunting the Jew.
Part of the problem, it's a huge problem, is that the Canadian government is terrified of Muslims. For the very reason that you just said. All of Europe is terrified of Muslims. They should be. They're not terrified of Jews. Muslims act on violence. They like it. They think it's totally appropriate. If someone insults the prophet, you kill them. If they're an infidel, you kill them. If they're Jewish, you just kill them. Obviously, the Muslims don't see it any other way. Most of them are Islamists, which means they're not interested in folding themselves within the confines of an American or a Canadian liberal democracy. Their interest is to impose their will and their religion on the West. They have managed to achieve which could not be achieved during the Middle Ages. The Western world was fighting against the tide of Islamism and succeeded largely to hold them back. and now they've been welcomed into your countries. And their views are fundamentally incompatible with liberal values, and they want you to change. They see you as the non-believer. And the governmental people in Sweden and Norway and Finland and Brussels and United Kingdom and France and Germany, they're terrified. They have reasons to. There have been many examples.
Terrified? Do you think they're terrified, or do you think they're pandering to the vote?
Both, but I also think they're terrified. I think they know that, as you saw, and we've seen many examples with the Danish cartoons, the French cartoons, people lose their lives if you offend a Muslim. It's very easy to offend a Muslim. I always use, in one of my books on free speech, I use the example of the Book of Mormon. Nothing ever eviscerates a religion like that musical, the Book of Mormon. But Mormons aren't killing people over it. On opening night on Broadway, when the Book of Mormon was premiered, there was a full-page ad taken out by the Church of Latter-day Saints in which they said, now that you've seen the musical, come into one of the churches and see the religion. That's it.
Right.
That's
right.
it. That's it.
Someone like Salman Rushdie has to go into hiding for his entire life because of his literature and his calling out.
Yeah, so I'm just saying they are pandering to votes, but I also think they're terrified out of their minds. They don't want to see terrorist attacks take place during their watch. If you're a premier of,
So when you say they're terrified, you're saying they're actually pandering to the votes, and they're placating the Muslim population because they're trying to avoid terrorism on their watch. They want to. That's their way of protecting.
And if the price is that Jews have to live in misery in Toronto, in Montreal, that's a small price to pay. They don't care.
We're expendable.
They don't care. They actually kind of enjoy it. So they watch this new persecution of the Jews, and they say, if I allow this to happen, I will gain the votes.
Have we entered into, and this is important, have we entered into an era of Jewish persecution once again, except have we entered into Jewish persecution in America or the entire free world? Are we now in an era of open Jewish persecution?
Well, we have been, Israel. We just haven't noticed it. I've been lecturing around the country in the United States and around the world, talking about what life has been like for the French Jews since 2006. And people are saying, what? And where I would go and tell people, they would literally say, you're a novelist, you just make that shit up. That can't be true. And I would tell them stories of Holocaust survivors that were burned to death in their apartments. One elderly Jewish grandmother was thrown off her balcony in Paris. Ilan Halimi was kidnapped and then tortured by, quote, a gang of barbarians. Two brothers coming home from school, a van pulled up against them and severed the fingers of one of the brothers. A 13-year-old girl was gang raped by Muslims, in which the people were screaming about her being a Jewish bitch. This has been going on all throughout Europe, in Brussels, in Stockholm.
Do you think that's coming here?
I think it is here. I think October 7th opened up a license in Canada and the United States. And now the French Jews, the British Jews, the Belgian Jews are looking at us and saying, you know what? You didn't pay attention. You weren't paying attention. Our countries had open immigration policies, and that we imported the hatred of Jews.
Listen, Canada has taken in 10 million people.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, unvetted, many of them unvetted.
Of course. And people you're afraid to say the truth, which is that, yeah, there's these campus protests and there's acts of violence, but they're largely committed by Islamists. These are people.
I got to tell you, I laugh. I laugh in a very tragic way when I see banners like Queers for Palestine.
Yeah, well, I don't know what to say about that, because I can't even think that they're that ignorant. I just think they're that. I think that they're that anti-Semitic, that they're prepared to overlook a larger truth, which is that you would last 5 minutes in Ramallah and Riyadh and Tehran and Cairo, literally 5 minutes.
They're prepared to sacrifice themselves in the name of anti-Semitism. Their hatred for the Jew override
It supersedes
their own concerns. It supersedes their concerns for their own safety and their freedoms and their liberties. And that narrative and that sort of what's going on right now, it's not just overt. So there is overt anti-Semitism, but there's also this subversive anti-Semitism that's happening. And I think that's more dangerous than anything else, because the subversive anti-Semitic narrative that is integrating itself within all corners of the public sector means, and what this means, and I think that this is what I've been thinking about a great deal lately, is it means of an unreasonable, non-objective bias against the Jewish person when they go and do anything within the public sector. If I go to educate my child, if I'm applying to university, if I'm in a professional organization, beyond just public institutions, it is infested like a malignancy within corporations as well. And here's the thing, I'll be standing at a counter, and the person will look at my passport, look at my thing, and they'll say, Israel? And there's that moment. There's that moment where I'm like, okay, what's going to happen here, right? And I'll wonder if it's a negative experience. I'll wonder, am I being paranoid? Is it because I'm Jewish? Or is it just a bad connection, a human connection between me and that other person? And I can't help but being paranoid. So we have really two things that are going on. We've got a narrative that is reaching out to every corner of the public and corporate institutions in terms of a biased narrative against Jewish people. And then we've also got a sense of paranoia amongst Jewish people, wondering for the results, the PTSD of being traumatized. So I've got a question for you, and this question is asked of me at every event I do. What is the answer? What can we do to correct this? Can we correct this? Is there any way possible that we can save America from eating itself out from the inside? What is it that the Jewish people can do today outside of violence? Because I don't think violence, I think you and I both will agree, violence is not the answer. What is the message? What is it that we can do to sort of change the narrative, if it can be changed at all at this point?
I don't think it can be. Nobody invites me on their podcast for good news, Israel. I look at this. I've been watching what's happened in Europe for 20 years, and I've been watching the slow migration of European Jews to Israel and to other places. There was a presumption that Canada and the United States was different. Now we know it's not. Now we know we have that there is a very vocal anti-Semitic impulse among Muslims especially, and progressives who are politically progressive. That change, this marriage between the Marxists of progressive Western culture, the progressive Marxists, and the Islamists, that marriage, which in many ways they have nothing in common, but the one thing they have in common is a binary view of the world between oppressor and oppressed, between good and evil, and between destroying the evil, ending evil. They share that. The Marxist Hegelian dialectic merges with the Islamist eliminationist impulse against the Jews and infidels. And they share this in common. They don't agree on anything else, but they share this in common, and they believe that there is a virtue, there's a morality is on their side to eliminate Jews. And
when you're talking about the Marxist side, you're really talking about this wokeism, this left that happened, the liberalization of Marxist sort of ideology, philosophy. I mean, however, this narrative that we're talking about, and you're saying that it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes.
Is that these opposing ideologies have now merged together.
And they created a critical mass.
And they've merged together with one single common goal and objective, despite I'm biting my nose to feed my face. The death cult of the jihadism represents a minority. I want to believe
That's not what the polling shows, Israel. That's not what it shows. The majority of people believed in a strict adherence to Sharia law. This is the same people, Jew-hating people, that this pathology, it's the world's oldest prejudice. And it's so deep, so pernicious that they, as we discussed, they overlook, it supersedes all other values. The progressive is looking at the Islamists and says, wait a minute, you are openly calling for the death of Jews? I love that. We love that. We believe too that white privileged Jews deserve to be dead.
I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View. I've done this podcast as a companion to the wake-up call. I'm going to ask you, don't be shy. Get it out there. Share it. Comment on this episode. Follow me on israelellis.com and on Substack. And I thank you for tuning in today when it's a lot easier to tune out.